This time they weren't interested in a feel-good fluff piece. They were covering an act of sabotage that led to a public safety scare. Reporters stood by the Greenbelt Trail, pointing at the reinforced gate now secured with double chains and a digital lock system. Meanwhile, I gave a short interview, remaining composed and firm. I didn't take shots at Karen by name, but I did say, "It's one thing to dislike your neighbor. It's another thing to endanger people and animals to make a point." Within 2 days, the story had exploded on Reddit. The title of the post was simply, "HOA unleashes buffalo to prove a point, gets trampled by facts." It included screen grabs of the news coverage, Karen's ridiculous HOA newsletter warning about the buffalo apocalypse, and a side-by-side shot of the animals peacefully grazing. The comment section was ruthless. One said, "Karen wanted a peaceful neighborhood. Now she gets Jurassic Park." Another wrote, "You don't mess with a rancher's fence unless you want to meet the beef squad." The board was forced to hold another vote, this time to decide whether Karen should be temporarily suspended while the investigation continued. Despite her protests, the vote passed 3-2. Steve made a short speech about leadership needing to be accountable and the importance of not abusing community power for personal vendettas. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended, her chair scraping the floor behind her like a declaration of war. But even without her physically present, her influence lingered. Over the next week, someone began leaving anonymous notes in my mailbox. The first read, "We'll get rid of your pests one way or another." The second simply said, "Your animals aren't welcome here." I turned them over to the sheriff, who added them to the case. I installed more cameras, upgraded my fence sensors, and made it very clear to the board that if anything happened to those animals, I would pursue legal action to the fullest extent. Despite the tension, I noticed something else happening too. Neighbors began reaching out, not the loud ones, but the quiet majority who had stayed on the sidelines until now. One older man, George, came by with fresh eggs from his chickens and said, "Used to be this was all farmland. Glad to see someone bringing it back with pride." A family down the street waved and gave me a thumbs up while their kids pointed excitedly at the bison from behind the fence. The tide was turning. Karen, however, wasn't finished. I could feel it. Even off the board, she had her loyalists, and something told me she wasn't the kind to accept defeat with grace. But for now, the animals were safe, the gate was sealed, and the truth had cracked her authority. She'd tried to sabotage me, but instead exposed her own recklessness. And the best part? The original $10,000 fine she tried to slap on me had just been called into question. My lawyer had filed an appeal with county oversight, citing harassment, improper enforcement, and retaliatory behavior. If it stuck, the HOA wouldn't just owe me an apology, they'd owe me a check. As I walked the pasture that night, I looked at the bison under the moonlight, solid, unbothered, symbolic. These weren't just animals anymore. They were resilience in fur. Karen had tried to force me into submission. Instead, she unlocked the gate to a reckoning. And something told me the wild part of the story had only just begun. It was just after midnight when the alarm on my phone buzzed, followed instantly by a notification from my security system. One of the motion detectors near the west gate had been triggered. I wasn't surprised, not after the last week's drama and the anonymous threats left in my mailbox. I'd expected someone to test my patience again. What I didn't expect was for it to be Karen herself. When I pulled up the live camera feed, there she was, crouched awkwardly by the gate, dressed in all black like a cartoon burglar. Her oversized sunglasses, worn even at night, glinted beneath the motion-activated floodlight. In one hand she held bolt cutters, in the other a flashlight with a shaking beam. For a moment I just stared at the screen in disbelief. The HOA's ex-president, self-declared defender of tranquility, was now attempting a midnight jailbreak on Buffalo. I stayed calm. I didn't run outside. I didn't even call the sheriff right away. First, I hit the record button. My cameras were already set to archive automatically, but I wanted a separate copy of this ridiculous scene. Karen struggled with the gate's double chain system, clearly underestimating just how reinforced it had become. She huffed, tried to wedge the bolt cutters into the links, and let out a muffled curse when sparks flew and nothing gave. Then, to my absolute astonishment, she dropped the tools and climbed onto a nearby bench, one I had placed for guests during bison tours. From there, she attempted to climb the fence itself. The bison, curious as always, began to approach. Not aggressively, not even particularly fast, just wandering slowly, heads bobbing, interested in the noise. Karen saw them and froze. Her arms windmilled slightly as she tried to decide whether to go up or down. One of the bison, the big male I'd named Dakota, let out a deep snort that echoed like a foghorn. Karen screamed. She fell backward off the bench, landing flat on her back in the dirt, her arms flailing like a flipped turtle. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I hit record again, just in case. By the time I called the sheriff, Karen had scrambled to her feet and was half running, half limping across the field, arms out for balance, shrieking into her phone. I didn't even need to guess who she was calling. But she was about to be very disappointed. When the deputies arrived, they took one look at my camera footage and immediately changed tone. Karen tried to spin it, of course, claimed she had come to inspect for safety, and that she'd noticed an improperly secured lock. But the footage clearly showed her snipping and tampering, not inspecting. The bolt cutters alone were damning. The sheriff asked her flatly why she hadn't called animal control if she was concerned. She stammered. She tried to redirect blame. She even mentioned mental anguish caused by the aggressive posture of the livestock, which made one deputy visibly roll his eyes. Karen was arrested for trespassing, attempted vandalism, and endangering wildlife. The charge of animal endangerment was particularly poetic given her months of fear-mongering over the bison. As the deputies led her to the cruiser, she screamed that she was saving the community from disaster, and that this isn't over. I watched her drive off in handcuffs with a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. It had taken months, but karma had finally answered, and it had horns. The fallout was swift. The next HOA board meeting was packed. Residents who'd never cared about the politics showed up in droves, many clutching printed copies of the newspaper article about Karen's arrest. She'd made front-page headlines for all the wrong reasons. One local blog dubbed her the Buffalo Bandit, and the photo of her on the ground, arms flailing, became a minor internet sensation. The board couldn't sweep it under the rug anymore. Her remaining supporters tried to stall, tried to claim due process, but it was no use. A formal vote was held. Karen was permanently removed from all HOA-related duties. Her access to official files, voting records, even the neighborhood newsletter was revoked. For the first time in years, she had no power to meddle. Meanwhile, my lawyer was having a field day. The video evidence, the previous threats, the failed gate sabotage, it all painted a perfect picture of harassment and misconduct. We filed a formal complaint with the county against the HOA, citing abuse of authority, false enforcement of code violations, and a coordinated attempt to sabotage my agricultural operation. The original $10,000 fence fine? Dismissed by the county with prejudice. But it didn't stop there. The county determined that the HOA had acted in bad faith, knowingly enforcing unenforceable fines and disregarding county agricultural exemptions. That meant restitution. A formal letter was sent to the board demanding repayment of legal fees, emotional distress damages, and loss of income caused by unnecessary delays in my livestock expansion. The total came to over $42,000. Steve, now the acting board president, called me personally. He apologized. Genuinely. He admitted that Karen had bullied most of them into compliance, and that he regretted not speaking up sooner. I believed him, and I told him I didn't want to see the HOA burned to the ground. I just wanted accountability. We negotiated. They paid the restitution. Publicly. At the next town meeting, a full statement was read, acknowledging their mistake and clearing my name entirely. With the drama behind me, I focused back on the bison. Dakota, the big male, had become a local celebrity. Tour groups from nearby schools asked for educational visit. I hired a part-time guide to give tours and explain the role of bison in ecosystem restoration. I partnered with a local butcher for ethically harvested meat from another farm, not my bison, but similar breeds, and started selling bison jerky, lean meat, and even handcrafted leather goods. What started as revenge had grown into a full-fledged business, and I was proud of that. The fence, once hated, was now famous. Someone had spray-painted "Prairie Justice" on one of the crossbeams, and instead of washing it off, I carved it in with a branding tool. It stayed. People took selfies there. The HOA, now under better leadership, updated their rules to officially allow agricultural fencing on edge properties. They even asked me to help draft the new guidelines. I accepted, with one condition: that no board member could approve a fine without legal review if it involved farm property. They agreed. Karen, meanwhile, kept a low profile. Her house went up for sale a few weeks later. Rumor had it she was moving to a stricter gated community where she hoped to join a more professional HOA. I wished her well, from a distance. Her exit was quiet, without ceremony or even a word to her former loyalists. Just a moving truck, a for sale sign, and a distinct absence of glares across the greenbelt. I installed one final security measure before I fully moved on. A motion-activated audio message that played a recording whenever someone stepped too close to the pasture fence after dark. It simply said, in a calm voice, "You are now within proximity of protected livestock. Please turn back." Behind the message was the subtle sound of Dakota's snort. It was a deterrent, sure, but also a reminder. A reminder that the fence wasn't there to separate or intimidate. It was there to protect. And sometimes, the thing people fight hardest against ends up being the thing that holds the community together. That night, I sat on the porch again, bourbon in hand, watching the silhouettes of the bison move slowly across the moonlit field. The wind carried the distant sound of children playing near the park, laughter bouncing softly through the trees. No more sirens. No more threats. Just peace. Earned, not given. And as Dakota lumbered over, leaned against the fence, and looked at me with those deep, calm eyes, I nodded and said aloud to no one in particular, she should have just let me keep my fence.